Greetings to all. I hope you're doing fine. We have often heard this term, surrender. Especially in spirituality, we often hear the word surrender. But what does it mean? What does it mean to surrender? Who surrenders? I will read out a couple of words by Sri Ramana Maharshi, where he explains what true surrender is. And he says, true surrender transcends worshipping God in a subject object relationship, since it could only be successfully accomplished when the one who imagined that he is separate from God has ceased to exist. The subject object split, subject being me, and the object being something other than me, something external to me, or God, or any other object. So, Bhagwan basically gave us two methods to surrender, to break this subject object relationship. One he described as the method of fixating the attention on this sense of I, which is self inquiry. And the second method was surrendering your life's responsibility to God. So, with that in mind, all one can do is simply observe how this entire process is happening. So, when one fixates the attention on this I, which Ramana Maharshi calls as the self inquiry, then eventually what happens is the I, not being allowed to move as I am this or I am that, merges back into its source. Now, the trouble is, when that happens, is not in the individual's control. It is not up to the seeker. So, all the seeker can do is simply bring back the attention to this I. So, that is one method. Second one, which he describes as surrendering one's life's responsibilities to God. This is more akin to the devotional aspect, where one puts complete faith in whatever is happening with total acceptance. But if you notice carefully, both of these methods eventually lead to surrender only, whether you call it self inquiry or you call it surrendering your life's responsibilities to God. Bhagwan Ramana often equated the practices of surrender and inquiry either by saying that they were different names for the same process or that they were only two effective means by which self realization could be achieved. He pointed out that any relationship with God, devotee, worship, servant, etc., was an illusory one, since God alone exists. True devotion, he said, is to remain as one really is, in the state of being in which all ideas about relationships with God have ceased to exist. So then the question comes up, what if I'm not able to do any of this? Then what do I do? Right? Let's say I'm not able to do self inquiry for some reason, or let's say that I'm not able to surrender my life's responsibilities also to God because I fear that if I do that, I will lose control of my life. I will lose my agency. Then what do I do? So, even for that, Bhagwan gives us a beautiful pointer. And he says, leave it to God. Surrender unreservedly. One of the two things must be done. Either surrender because you admit your inability and require a higher power to help you, or investigate the cause of misery by going to the source and merging into the self. Either way, you will be free from misery. God never forsakes one who has surrendered. So the idea is that even if one has tried their level best and is not able to surrender, one can simply accept that as well and say that I am not able to surrender. I completely give up, that I'm not able to do anything about my situation. Therefore, I accept everything the way it is. And this understanding eventually leads to total surrender. But wishing things to be a certain way is not total surrender. There is an element of ego in that. Saying that I cannot surrender is again ego's defense because there is no how to surrender. All these questions are resistances. If somebody asks you a simple task like have a glass of water, You don't ask, how should I drink water? You just drink water. And Bhagwan says, it is that simple if you really get to know what it is. So, those who are ready, those seekers who are ripe, they have no explanation of what they did to achieve surrender. They never achieved surrender. In other words, surrender was not a personal act, it was not a personal doing. Surrender is impersonal, which means it is not convened by thought. It is not that you will repeat and say, I surrender, and eventually you'll surrender. No, it's not about that. Surrender happens through pain sometimes, as life brings challenges, and the ego rises up in resistance. And in that resistance, it feels pain. And that pain eventually leads to this understanding that there is something beautiful, something wonderful that is effortless and readily available here and now. And all that needs to be done is to just be there. In other words, surrender means to be with the I or the being. Just be as you are. Here, Ramana Maharshi says, just be as you are. That's it. Bring back yourself to your home, the untouched, the witness. It is not a matter of force or vigilance. Simple remembrance. Whenever you remember to come back home and relax there. And in that relaxation is surrender, because you are not wanting the outcome to be a certain way. So that resistance is I, me, mine, or the separation. And ending of that separation is surrender. The man who sheds all longing and moves without concern, free from the sense of I and mine, he attains peace. Bhagavad Gita verse 2,71. It means the discarding of all desires. Therefore, should we devote ourselves exclusively to the contemplation of God and accept food and water only if they are available by God's grace without asking for them? Or does it mean that we should make a little effort? Bhagwan, please explain the secret of this sarangati, surrender. And Bhagwan says, Ananya Sarangati, complete surrender, means to be without any attachment to thoughts, no doubt. But does it mean to discard even thoughts of food and water, which are essential for the sustenance of the physical body? He asks, should I eat only if I get anything by God's direction and without my asking for it, or should I make a little effort? Let us take it that we have to eat comes of its own accord. But even then, who is to eat? Suppose somebody puts it in a mouth, should we not swallow it at least? Is that not an effort? So, what Bhagwan here is saying is these processes are happening on its own. Of course, we don't live in this time where we are hard pressed for that. So, basic essentials, whatever the body requires, body gets. But to attach the notion that I am the body, that I need this, I need that, beyond the basics, I would say, creates a clinging, an attachment. And that attachment then creates pain. Because that attachment is the subject object relationship, as Bhagwan explains here. So you see, it is the total effortlessness in which the surrender happens. And when the surrender happens, usually there is no question because there is no me to question anything. Surrender doesn't mean giving up your basic needs, but understanding that those are just basic needs of the body. And you, which arises every now and then, is a piece of fiction. So when the attention is brought to this I, it traces back to its source. And that is what Bhagwan calls self realization or surrender. They're one and the same thing. All right. We can take a couple of questions now. So, one question is, how can I make God present with me always? Well, bring attention to this me. The moment you bring attention to this me, you're always in the presence, which means me, when it inverts on itself, is no more me, is God only. And Bhagwan, as I mentioned earlier, says that God alone exists. So start with that notion that God alone exists. And then automatically you will find that that notion, that understanding itself will bring you into the presence. And it will be effortless. Okay, Mira says, your mental series of 2024 helped me tremendously, brought me out of dark night of the soul. Gratitude. I'm glad, Mira, that it helped. Thank you. Abhishek, lots of love. In your previous live sessions, I requested you to make a video on UG Krishnamurti. He goes beyond Jiddu Nisargadatta Maharaj Osho. Please make video on his teachings. All right, I will consider that request, and uh, I will explore into. To be very honest, I haven't explored that much of his work, but I will go into it. Life sometimes leaves you with no choice. You have to surrender, but for existence, you should have ego. UG Krishnamurti teaching has confused me. Well, you see, for existence, you don't need ego. Existence alone is sufficient for functional existence. The ego comes into play because of ideas, because of imported beliefs, which were never in your, because a child does not have that kind of an ego. The mind of a child is quite plain. It is not conditioned. So the mind of a child is basically instinctive. If the child is hungry, child will demand with most innocence. He or she will demand food from mother, cry when um, when it feels hurt, or when there is a strong stimulus, or laugh without inhibitions. So the thing is, there the conditioning has not yet happened. As we grow up, we acquire more and more external knowledge, concepts, and it is that knowledge, those concepts, that build up this image that we call as the ego. But to be honest, all it does is create pain in existence. The functional aspect of the separation, of the separate self, which is also the ego, but it is not the problem ego. It is simply there for sustenance. But then there is another aspect which flows in horizontal time as I want to become this, become that. And then that creates problems, that creates suffering. So Krishna says at present, being feels inside the body only. Yes, because we have identified with the body, we have invested in the body for so many years. So it is natural to have that feeling. But you see, deep sleep is one of your greatest pointer, because even while you don't experience anything in deep sleep, you know that it exists, and there was something in the deep sleep. So there must have been something beyond the body, because the senses were absent in deep sleep. Okay, Ravi is saying Ravi is saying something about UG, and I'm not going to go there right now. But uh, I feel that all masters have their way of expression, and I particularly feel I only talk about the masters who talk about the heart, because for me, none of none of this talk about intellectual talk about what is this, what is that, is important. For me, heart is important. For me, connection, companionship is more important than anything else. And all I'm doing here is connecting with you with all my heart. So I want you to get out of that intellectual rut, because that intellect is part of the ecosystem. So that's why I never assert that what I'm saying is the absolute truth. I may be completely wrong in all of this. God knows. But you see, I have experienced something in my life which has brought me peace. And I share that path with you all. Will it bring you peace the same way it has brought me? I don't know. It's not in my control. But for those who are destined to receive that grace, maybe my experience will be helpful. That's all. So I'm only sharing here my concept. But yes, I tend to focus more on the heart rather than on the mind. So I can do mental gymnastics with trying with and tell you thousand ways of how you are pure consciousness. But unless and until you wake up and experience that for yourself, now that may happen through self inquiry, it may happen through yoga, it may happen through meditation, it may happen through japa, it may happen through any other means, or it may just happen without any doing anything. It is not in my control. But what I can do is point you to investigation. And in that investigation, there will be some intellectual concepts discussed. And that those intellectual concepts will bring you peace. But to go beyond the intellect into the heart is the final destination, so as to speak, is the last hurdle, because that is where true peace is. Otherwise, we have been discussing these things and debating these things since ages, and mind hasn't been able to come to terms with it. But heart is always in sync. Okay. All right, Gaurav, please make a video on how to get out of body experience, because whole spiritual process is about recognizing I'm not the body. So, Gaurav, even if you get out of the body, you may still not be convinced. Even if you have that experience, you eventually come back to body, okay? And when you come back to the body starts acting and reacting in the same condition. So eventually it doesn't really, there is something else, there is something beyond that, which is much more potent. And yes, I mean, it may, when that happens, it may make certain fears disappear. For example, the fear of death may dissolve because of that experience. But again, I personally do not subscribe to these methods, these ways, or trying to, bring your attention to something which feels beyond the body, because um, again I feel it is again an obstruction to the real knowledge, as Bhagwan says, letting the I merge back into the source. When that happens, it is not a thought process. The surrender is not through thinking. It is not by convincing oneself through thought that I am not the body. It is just recognizing that this here is reality, which is so intricately interwoven with so many, with such multiplicity. But the underlying factor is one consciousness. And that realization, that is surrender, that realization is true surrender, is true knowledge. Yes, Ravi. Ravi says not dualistic. I mean, not, yes. I think I got your point there. Okay. Kami says, talk us through your dark night. How intense was it? How was your relationship with those closest? Were you religious before that? No, I think I was never religious. Well, I never had any trouble with religion as such. I mean, I would go to temple, I would go to gurdwara. Even now, I go to temples and gurdwaras. I respect all religion. But to be honest, my whole uh, like my whole outlook towards these things was that whenever, for example, I would enter gurdwara, my mind would go blank. I never had to, I never would remember to ask anything, ask for anything from God. I never saw anything in form from the very beginning. I knew that there is something beyond the form, and I wanted to know that. So, in that way, you can say I was seeker all my life, because I always questioned the space. I thought, what is this invisible space which is holding things? Then I thought about thoughts. What is that space which holds thoughts? So, Dark Night of the Soul was basically an intense process for me. And literally, I mean, I was declared useless and mad for the world, completely useless for the world, because I had left my job, and I didn't have much money also. So, supporting myself, family, and friends, equation with friends. Yes, people moved away, relationships broke, a lot of things happened, but everything was accepted because that is what surrender means. Surrender was happening. It wasn't that I was trying to push people away or trying to change my circumstances. I wasn't doing anything at all. I completely surrendered to the process. So there would be intense emotions. I would experience the highs and the lows, clarity, confusion, and it went on for quite some time. Some people left, new people came, old friendships broke apart, new friendships formed. But yes, there was a gap between these two processes. The whole, my whole perception of things started changing. It became more refined. I could see beyond, I could see in between. I could see the futility of what is described as beneficial, ultimate, worldly wise. I could see it comes with the opposite. Now, when that happens, the desires no more remain desires. The nature of desire changes completely. So I would see that I would run after some desires, but wasn't um, there wasn't this strong identification that the desire must be fulfilled in order for me to be happy, because I knew that even if the desire gets fulfilled, there would be the opposite. The pain would also come with that desire. And I could see that my body could not resist, my body would still run for it. And that was also accepted. So ultimately, the desire dissolved. And some were fulfilled also without my trying anything. And it it just didn't create any turbulence in my daily living. So if the desires were fulfilled, that was okay. If they were not fulfilled, that was also okay. Okay. Ross says, my problem is I suffer from madness sometimes, where I have odd thoughts, get taken to the mental hospital, which is traumatic. I wish to use surrender to stay sane. You see, sometimes body reacts in a way and we call it madness, we give it names, but it is just energy. Now, it's okay to seek help, if something is too traumatic. But again, surrender is not a recipe to staying sane as such. Surrender is the recognition of that principle within you, which is sanity, which is pure sanity. What that means is being aware of your beingness, the unaffected beingness, even while the body is reacting strongly, will eventually pull you back into that peaceful place, into that presence. That is your natural state. So surrender is this total understanding that yes, sometimes the body reacts, which may be problematic for people around us, and sometimes spiritual people can act in uh, eccentric ways, and there can be certain patterns which are strong, but they always return to that baseline. What you are is not the body, as the masters say. So when that knowledge goes deep within you, in your being, then there will be a natural relief from all this trauma. Now, it may not completely go away, but definitely it does come down to quite an extent. And I've heard it from many people. My own patterns I had seen were severely reduced. They were not completely gone, they're still there sometimes, but there is no concern with me to fix myself as such because the presence pulls back always into the most natural state, and it is effortless. Thank you, Abhishek, for your contribution. And I would also like to thank Martina for her generous contribution. Okay, Gaurav says, how can I live in how can I live eternally in one moment? Well, by just knowing who you are. How Ramana Maharshi got awakened at 16 years of age. What is the secret? Well, he got awakened at 16 years of age because that was destined for him. That was God's will for him. You see, Nisargadatta Maharaj says, faster is not better. Even after having the experience, he still isolated himself, went to Arunachala, lived in Virupaksha caves for so many years. So, what was happening in those years? Dark night of the soul. I'm sure he was experiencing dark night of the soul there too. Now, he was a man of few words, but he always spoke about the challenges. How did he know about the challenges? I'm sure he had gone through the challenges. So it is not that awakening is instant moment of bliss. In fact, awakening is an instant moment of recognition of one's true nature, but it does bring about something very turbulent later on. And for years sometime, which we call as the dark night of the soul, because the mind is still operating and it still has its patterns. Mind does not surrender. Mind gets to know its illusion, and then it says, who is this me? Who am I? And that is when surrender happens. Again, impersonally. The knowledge, the true knowledge, the jnana dawns. And that is why I think Ramana Maharshi calls surrender as self inquiry also as surrender, jnana also as surrender. Okay. Bastian. So Bastian says, can you give us pointer on how to make decisions from our essence nature? How do we calibrate our decisions if there is no absolute right or wrong? So this question is again a resistance to surrender. How can I make the right decision? Which means I don't want to be wrong. What is the need to calibrate? One can simply make the decision and leave right and wrong to God. That is true surrender. The thing is, it is not in our control what our mental state is at a given moment, because we are exposed to so much stimuli. You may be, very relaxed on a Sunday morning, and you may notice that some of the difficult challenges, when you encounter in that moment, you are able to operate from the beingness, from presence, and you're able to make wise decisions in that moment. But let's say when the mind is agitated and you're not in presence, well, it is not true that you're not in presence. Everything arises from presence, but this is the illusion where mind forgets its nature, its true nature, and makes a decision from limitation. What to do then? There is nothing you can do then. You cannot force this process. All that can be done is accept totally that sometimes you will not be able to operate from presence. And interestingly, when you do that, you notice that the presence increases even more. It deepens even more. So surrender melts something, and that is resistance. But if we are not 100% convinced, if we have not totally surrendered, then we do ask this question: how can I make the decision from presence? There is no I in the presence. There is simple spontaneous decisions being made without worrying about right and wrong. Abhishek, thank you. Your word that has hit me hard is awakening happens, dent in the structure. Those words and all other teachings from your side are like ointments to the wounds I was having. Yes, I often describe awakening as a dent in the structure of the personality or a crack in the structure of the personality, which does not mean that you all of a sudden become all knowledgeable and the world dissolves for you. It doesn't happen like that. What it simply means is there is a crack now. Okay, so all the constructs, all the structures that you carried from the very beginning, I am this, I am that, this is my ambition, I want to be this in life, that in life, this will bring me happiness, that will bring me happiness, all of those structures now begin to crack. So it is painful because we have invested so much in those structures from the very beginning. Our parents have told us, no, do this, this will bring you happiness. I wish our parents were more honest with us and tell us that, my children, this is all just survival. you know, this guarantees no happiness. But yes, you have to do it because there's nothing else we can suggest you right now. If they were that honest, it would be much better. But you see, how can you be that honest to a child? Child will never understand because child lives in the dream world. When I say child, I mean, adolescence, teenage, and so you see, there is no escape. One cannot escape the fantasy, and yet fantasy is the cause of our trouble. All those structures are nothing but fantasies. So there is a crack in the structure. The reality hits. There is no me. And those who those who have listened to UG Krishnamurti, he describes it as a calamity. He saw his own unreality. He saw that there was no him anywhere, and that shook him because his ego was very strong. And it all of a sudden there was this crack, and it shook him to the core. For Ramana Maharshi, it was very natural. At the age of 16, He could just see it directly. But then it is different for different, the process is different for different people. There is no same process for anybody. So Bodhi says, "Your heart, that is why I'm here. It is the final call." Oh, thank you. Thank you, Bodhi Martina. Okay, Aliska says, "A weird but beautiful thing happened to me while becoming close with a guy. I looked into his eyes and I felt God everywhere. Not even in him, but everywhere. Have you had a similar experience?" You see, sometimes it so happens that when we drop all resistance, the subject object split dissolves. Now, if that has happened, you know, by looking at someone and seeing God, because you're not looking at someone in that moment, then. And they say eyes are the portal to the soul. Soul is not different. Your soul and my soul are not different, two different entities. It is one soul, one and one. I don't want to call it an entity, it is oneness. So that can happen. It would happen to me when I would watch traffic sometimes. I would lose myself. I remember when I was working, I used to go to, during lunch breaks, I used to isolate myself and go and sit in a corner and watch traffic, people just moving from one corner to another. And in that watchfulness, I would just lose everything. And all I could see was the complete totality, the pure subjectivity in the entire objectivity. And I knew that it's all one. How? Because there was no me in that moment. There was only oneness. So, as Bhagwan says, only God exists. And sometimes, relationship can be a beautiful portal to that vastness. Because when you surrender to your partner, in that sometimes the universal surrender also happens. And then you discover something deep. So, that is also one of the ways. Okay, Mira says, so Kundalini sadhana does not lead to enlightenment. Is self realization and enlightenment different? Adi Shankaracharya philosophy says realizing self as Satyananda is not permanent state, Paramananda. Okay, let me understand the question. Well, you see, no. Here is my idea. Self realization for me is basically awakening, crack in the structure. Enlightenment is for me only a concept. I do not really know what is meant by enlightenment. So we'll first have to discuss what is enlightenment. Only then can we come to this part. And I cannot understand the second part. These are very heavy terms for me, Satyananda, Paramananda. There is, yeah, I do agree with this statement that there is no permanent state. So if enlightenment is described as a permanent state, then for me that is just a concept, because I have not yet uh, experienced any kind of a permanent state. Okay, Kami says, since you weren't religious, well, I won't say, yes, I mean, I did not believe in rituals as such, but I observed, I respected the rituals, and I would take part in it sometimes, but for me, it did not mean much. Okay, but I'll read your question. Since you weren't religious, means your relationship with God wasn't transactional like majority. You know, the thing is, I never had a notion of God as someone separate. So when people would say Upar wala, for me that did not make any sense, because for me there was no Upar. I mean, uh, God in the high heavens. I could not understand that concept. There was no heaven, there was no God apart from, you know, this. For me, I could not see God in form at all. So your identities were already soft to be broken and shed. Probably, probably it was that way. I do not know. But I had my uh, trouble with the worldly things, and I went through all of those emotionals, ups and downs that everybody goes through. Okay. Oh dear. Thank you, Martina. When you say you had this knowing, even fulfillment of desires won't take away the flatness and bring peace. Did you know that already, or it came slowly? No, it came slowly. There was one time when my desires were strong, and I would fight, and I was completely materialistic at that time. And just like, an average, quote unquote average, ordinary fellow. I mean, I'm still that, but I would, yeah, I would try to rise up in the corporate ladder, uh, try to make more money for myself, try to come up with new strategies to make more money. I was completely absorbed in every worldly affair. And so all those things were strong at that point. I was quite materialistic in my 20s and my early 30s. So, but when this crack happened, um, it was instantaneous knowledge, and the experience of oneness. It just, there was this vastness, expansiveness that happened, that softened, that formed the base. But even after that, my mind would continue with the pattern. So I would often go back to trying to chase again. Oh, no, no, what am I doing? I must go back to work. I must do this, earn more money, do that. But it never lasted long. It would just come up momentarily, then it would subside. Then again come up momentarily, then again would subside. So I had my ups and downs. Eventually it just dissolved. When, how, I don't even remember. It just dissolved. Okay. Edison says, I feel this deep surrender within me for almost everything. My biggest challenge is my mind telling me, how should I sustain this life? I will run out of money this year. I have to work or something. You see, the surrender has got nothing to do with this problem of sustenance. Sustenance can happen. Surrender doesn't need time apart from work or money. So if body has needs like food, sustenance, the body will work for food and sustenance, you know. So surrender does not mean that you completely put your hands down and sit at home and just say, I am in Brahman and I am pure consciousness. No, it does not mean that. It is not about being passive. You will continue to live your life the way your circumstances are. If you are in a job, let's say, and you have family and you have people who are dependent on you, you will continue to work in that way to provide for them. And that becomes your spiritual sadhana, because you will go through challenges, you will go through ups and downs, and that observation itself will lead to surrender, will lead to that softening. It is not that you have to completely move away from the material world. And I made a video also about this today. There is no material world out there. Nisargadatta Maharaj said that subjectivity, pure subjectivity, God is in the objectivity. There is no God separate from the material world. God does not favor spirituality over material. For God, God is all one. It is material, it is spiritual, it is all. So if your current circumstances require you to earn money, then earn money. It is not a hindrance to your spiritual practice. You can always come back to I. In fact, you can use that platform. Just inquire, why are you unhappy with the situation the way it is right now? What is the challenge? The challenge is usually not out there. The challenge is within, where probably, we as, employees, we form a notion about ourselves. We have created an image about ourselves. I should be like this, I should be like that. And when the external circumstances don't conform to this image, that is when we, create this unrest, this disquiet, this agitation, that I now want spirituality. But you see, spirituality is not escape. I worked for 13 and a half years in the corporate world, and I've had spiritual insights. I would, listen to Osho and talk about masters with my father and other people. But it wasn't a conducive time for me to leave my job at that point. But then a time came when I could leave my job, so I left it. But one doesn't necessarily have to, change one's life to such an extent. You don't have to leave your job or any such thing. Bhagwan simply says, bring your attention to the I, and that's it. You will know. Let that process happen whenever it's happening. There's nothing to be done as such. You cannot do surrender. Surrender is being. Okay, Anjurani says sometimes your words create comfort and sometimes it creates discomfort. Yes, that's my job is to create discomfort sometimes, and also I sprinkle in comfort in betweens to give relief. Just like in the Hindi movies, back in the 60s and the 70s, they used to have these intense movies with, Meena Kumari and other actors, and there would be a tragedy going on, but in between there would be comic relief, like, actors like Johnny Walker would come up, or other actors, they would put comic relief in between. Now it doesn't happen that way. I think now the main leads are only doing comedy. But you see, that's what I do, because it is through this confusion that the surrender will happen. Okay, Aliska says, what you were describing with the traffic, I have also felt many times, but this time with this guy, it was somehow even stronger and it stuck with me ever since. Yes. So this is this is the thing. At some point it sticks with you. It can, again, it can happen through a person, through a situation, it can happen on its own. And sometimes that realization can be so deep that it stays with you. But the mind will still come up. That does not mean that surrender has totally happened. that means an understanding has happened, which is also, I say, is grace of God, even to have that understanding. But true surrender happens through deliverance of life. Kami, your views about Sadhguru. Sadhguru. You know, I just say this one thing: take whatever is good. You know, nobody is pure black or pure white. Take what resonates with you from every teacher, see what they're saying, and see if it stands in your life. Now, we all, I think sometimes even it happens personally with me that I go on a tangent and speak about a lot of things that I truly do not know much about. But, you know, since you ask, I respond. But if it doesn't make sense to you, if it doesn't, if you say that, okay, this is something which doesn't sit well with me, then I would say use your own faculties to investigate. And um, so, that's all I can say. There's nothing more to say. Okay, so Edison says, uh, I would like to add that the challenge specifically is that I feel the huge drive to do projects within me, but no calling since long time. I am impatient and also feel pressure due to financial part. So, again, in this whole thing, all you can do is just investigate who is the one that feels the pressure of the financial part. What is your relationship with people around you, with job? Just see this entire picture. And if these things are happening right now, let it happen. Let it happen. Accept that that's a part of your personality, and your organism, you, the organism, is tuned in that way right now. And you will see that through that acceptance, the resistance will melt. There's no point fighting it, there's no point trying to change that conditioning. You can try other modalities to change that conditioning, but it is not going to happen unless it is God's will. Okay. Answan says, can you say something about how to manage anxiety sometimes, because events around me thwarted expectations? I get anxious and agitated. I know that eventually things will settle, but in the moment it feels unsettling. Yes. So in the moment it will feel unsettling. That is what the masters say. What happens in the moment is in nobody's control. And when you accept that about yourself, that in the moment I will act and react according to my conditioning, that itself will bring the surrender. Fighting the anxiety increases the anxiety. Trying to do something about it does not help. Now, of course, momentarily, you can do deep breathing, and you know, you can do anything, any other activity to make yourself calm. But to what extent is it going to help you is also not in your control. Sometimes it may help, other times it may not help. To see the source of that anxiety, go to the source of that anxiety. Just be with that feeling in that moment, and you will see its illusory nature. and it won't be a problem. And it will somehow have, next time when the anxiety happens, you will see it. You will say, okay, this I know, and I know why it happens. I know when these type of situations, for example, some people can get anxious because of financial situations. Sometimes I get anxious when there is a financial challenge, you know and that is why I keep asking you for support. But you see, it is all in the moment. It is all in the moment. So what happens in the moment is in nobody's control. But afterwards, if you get settled, that is grace. That itself shows that you have seen that it is not the real feeling. It is just mind's conditioning. Otherwise, the feeling would persist. Kami, did you take something from Sadhguru? If yes, then what? My God, what is this fascination with Sadhguru? Sadhguru. Well, I tell you what. um I take everything. I take many things from different teachers, and I take rascality from Sadhguru, just as I take rascality from Osho. To own one's own rascality is quite a freedom. That means not caring about what others form opinion about yourself. Now, people may say that you are aligned in this way, you are thinking in this way, you are doing this right, that wrong. As far as I see, Osho or Sadhguru or even other teachers did not care much about people's opinion and just continued to do whatever they wanted to do. So that is a good thing in my concept. And yes, I mean, I'm sure there are many other things that people, that's beneficial for other people. So beyond that, I cannot comment. Aliska, you're funny. Have a nice day. Yes, yes. I know. My whole job is to create humor and confusion. I operate on these two things, and these are very dear to me. Okay, I think we'll just um, we'll just take up maybe one or two questions and then we'll conclude. I think it's already an hour now. Okay. Natya says, how do we send you donation? Well, you can send me through PayPal, or you can contribute here on the super chat. You can go to my website page, which is jagjotsingh.com/donate, and I think the link will be mentioned in the description somewhere, and you can use any of the methods you would like to. Okay, I'm just going to take one last question and then I'm going to conclude. Okay, this is from All About Everything. However, mother expects me to be out there and be the same accomplished woman again. She expects me to also be pushy with my children to make them performers. She says hurtful things and judges. She says hurtful things and judges me constantly. I can't stand it anymore. How to handle her? You know, yes, this can be dealing with a parent where the parent is not understanding can be very challenging. Can be very challenging. Uh, but you see, if you know who you truly are, that means if you go to that aspect of yourself where there's no fear, what do we fear when we are interacting with a parent? We fear that if we offend them, we will lose them. So, at some level, there is a fear of abandonment that my parent will leave me and that will hurt me because they will get upset if I offend them. When we see that fear and when we see the hollowness of that fear, we understand that we are not here to live anybody's expectations. We're not here to live anybody else's blueprint in life. So, surrender leaves us to this understanding that we're not here to fulfill other people's fantasies and ideas. And if I can do something about it, I will. But if I can't, then I will suffer. Sometimes that happens. So, but nothing stops me from investigating that why do I fear? And then let's trace that fear to its source. In that place of beingness, there is only calm, there is no fear. Yes, it may happen that if you confront your mother about it, she may not talk to you. If I accept that, so you need to question, you need to ask yourself, where is that fear? Because you see, once you've dealt with it, there is no need to handle anybody because you're very clear that your boundaries are being stepped and you're not going to tolerate that. So I sincerely wish that you find a solution to that problem, but you only are going to have to find a solution. There is no way, no method. Because if I give you a method to handle her, it's not going to work. Okay. All right. Uh, okay. Just one more last question I'll take up. I'm glad to meet, this moment is life says, I'm glad to meet like minded people in the spiritual journey like you. However, most of the time I feel lonely during day to day life. Any advice? Thanks. Well, um, I would say that take up whatever activity you resonate with. Sometimes that may require some exploration. For example, I walk a lot. Now, I know it seems a little because it's not an activity as such, which is very creative or very well known, but sometimes simple things like walking and simply observing your mind that can be done. And bringing your attention to again to this I that feels lonely can take you to a place where there is no loneliness. So in your day to day advice, day to day life, just try to see where what resonates with you, what activities are possible for you, and try to take up those activities. You know, there is no there is no specific advice I have on this subject because I feel everyone has to explore through their own experience. And sometimes it takes time. One has to accept that. All right. Uh, Thank you so much. I wish you all peace, happiness, and I'll see you again soon. Take care.